in the on top of the tunnels. One day when we were on the train, we heard a great shudder. The whole train shook. And then later we found out we no longer ever went back to work there. Later we found out that they had blown up the installation, that the Russians were approaching. And the word Russian were approaching was like the Messiah is coming. It had the same type of feeling. It gave you hope. You saw the Russian planes overhead, and you knew the SS disappeared, and now they had all the German guards who were dealing with us. It was no longer SS. We never went back to work there.
How did you know that the Russians were not with the Germans?
Because no, these were the Russian. This was the Russian army. Now you're talking about very late 1944, and you no longer had the SS guarding us. You had the Home Guard. That's what they were called, and the Home Guard were much kinder, and they told us to have hope. And then one morning they made us line up, and they said that we're leaving the camp. And we would line up, and they said that those that can walk will march out of the camp, the rest will stay here, and they will be taken by truck, by transport. And they went through the lines, and they would just shove the person that they didn't want to walk. And that's when I got separated from my father. They shoved them out of the line, and he reassured me that we will probably meet wherever we're going.
Okay, we have to stop here to switch.
Okay.
Number 4, survivor David Stein. Interviewer Sharon Steinberg Perlman, August 1st, 1995. Mr. Stein, before you tell me about your separation from your father, I just want to ask you if there was any religion in the camps.
Yes, there was religion. We had the very observant Jews who would get up even earlier, and sometimes they daven Shachris even before there was light. They felt that was the only time they could daven Shachris. And they would daven their Shachris and Mincha Ma'ariv in the evening.
They didn't have a siddur or tefillin or anything,
No,
did they?
no, but they were very observant Jews. As a matter of fact, I knew the entire daily prayer by heart. And I was only 13 and a half years old. That's one of the things they taught you in Cheder, in Hebrew school, is the daily prayers to commit it to memory. But we had in camp with us, we had the rabbi, the altar roof.
From your town in Rachel?
From the Rachel roof. He's a very famous roof, by the way. Many people who view this will know instantly what I'm talking about. He had people come from the entire region would come and see him. And then he would make pronouncement as the observance of holidays, what they had to do. And I remember that it was Yom Kippur was approaching, and they were discussing whether they had to fast or due to special circumstances they didn't have to fast. And the rabbi ruled that in these difficult times that fasting was necessary. So I don't know how many people fasted. I know my father didn't fast, and he asked me not to fast. I didn't fast. But there were many people who fasted, and it was an incredible act because you're constantly hungry. The biggest treat was when we were marching from the camp to the railroad station. We were walked by an orchard, and some apples would fall off these trees. And if the guard would permit you, he would pick out some younger ones, and he would say, get the apples. You know, he would tell the guard in back of him that he's authorizing it. You know, otherwise, if you just jumped out, they would shoot you. The biggest treat is if you had an apple. You know, so that was a kindness in itself. But that would never happen with the SS. That happened really with the Home Guard.
Who was the Home Guard?
Home Guards were male civilians, 55, 60-year-old men. That they were the Home Guards. They were Austrians. And so we would see a kindness here and there of the nature of letting us pick apples off.
The Home Guards lived in?
They lived in
Northwood?
the army barracks, and the camp was surrounded with towers, watchtowers, and they would be on the watchtowers. Had an electrified fence, and basically the entire camp was run by other inmates, basically German political murderers and some Polish. The Polish, they were called kapos. They were really cruel, I must tell you, beyond belief cruel. And they would run the camp from the inside, because to disobey is to write your own death sentence. So if you had hope of surviving, you just didn't disobey. There was so we were talking about the separation. So we lined up, and that was after they destroyed the ammunition factories.
What month is this? Do you recall?
This had to be sometimes in November, December. You know, it still was no snow on the ground, but it was already it was cold already. And they said that we were going to a different camp, and it was a long walk, and those people that are capable of walking will walk, and those that are not capable of will be taken there by transport. So they basically choose who was going to walk and who was not going to walk, and they went through the ranks, and that was done by the SS, and they physically pushed the people out of line. And it was after I got to Ebensee, which was the next concentration camp, I began to put two and two together, because we were waiting for weeks for the people that were left behind to catch up to us.
The ones who went by transport.
Right. And nobody ever saw them again, nobody heard from them again, and we assumed that the Germans exterminated the remnants. They had a crematorium in Melk. There was a crematorium next to the infirmary, and there were not too many of us left. Maybe I would say 250, 300. You know, so I imagine we marched towards a river and embarked on a boat. So I imagine those people that they choose to walk were the ones they had room on the boat for, because they were very calculating. You can't rationalize it when it's happening, because the desire to survive is so strong. You just don't sit down and rationalize and say, no, I'm not going to do that because they have ulterior motives. You do it or you're dead. There's no two ways about it. So it was after that I began to put two and two together and realized what had happened, because the boat was really loaded.
So your father went on the transport.
He stayed back, okay, and the rabbi stayed back. His sons were on the transport, and
What did your father say to you the last time you saw him?
we didn't talk. We did not talk. They pushed him out, and he looked back, and I waited for him to come. He never came.
Did those who stayed behind, like your father, did they know where they were going to be wind up?
I don't think so. I don't think they knew, because they were too willing. They were too willing to do it. I mean, nobody objected. Nobody said that they can walk. Let me walk, I can walk. Nobody said it. They pushed and they stepped out. So we went on this boat, which took like one day, one late in the afternoon, we rode on the boat all night, all of the next day and the following night, and we disembarked very early in the morning. And that's when our forced march began. And I told you that I will tell you about whether the people knew or didn't know. We marched from the river, which I imagine was the Danube, but I can't tell you if it was the Danube. I would have to look it up. It was a huge river, which there was many boats on that river. And so we disembarked, and we were told that we were going to march all day, and anybody that fell out or could not continue to walk, that there were trucks in the back that would pick them up. But by this time, the people stopped believing, and in fact, everybody knew if they fell that that was the end of them. And we would hear gunshots. When somebody would fall, a few minutes later you would hear a gunshot, you knew that the person was killed, and in fact, trucks did pick him up.
Were you allowed to look back?
No, you didn't have to look back. First of all, there were too many people,
How many were you?
Oh, well, let's say 250, 300. So, it's no reason to look back, you just know. Instinct tells you, you hear a gun, after somebody falls, a few minutes later you hear a gunshot. You know what's happening, they're whispering in the ranks. And we went through these little villages where there was only one road to go through. And the houses are right up against that road. And people in the houses were looking out. Some people were looking out from the second floor. They had beautiful lace curtains on these windows. And they were standing behind the curtains and looking. So if somebody said that they didn't know anything, I tell you that they knew. They had to know. We were not the only people that marched through those villages. But in any case...
Do you remember the names of those villages?
No. The boat docked at a place called Ebensee, which is near the lake. It was a huge lake. And we marched from there, we were marched inland. And we were absolutely, at night, we bedded down just on the plain fields, and it was cold. And they would feed us at night, and they would feed us in the morning, never during the day. And we marched maybe 3 or 4 nights. Again, I don't have the exact figures. We marched through, and again, if you had to, bodily functions had to be done in place, anybody set up, they would shoot. They definitely didn't want to have any escapees amongst these villages. Didn't. So they would shoot. So, finally we got to this concentration camp, and it was called Ebensee.
Can you spell that, please?
I think it's spelled E-B-E-N-Z-E-E, Ebensee. And we got into the camp, which now was, January was approaching. It was very cold, and things were terribly disorganized in that camp. It was no longer like milk. You didn't know who was in charge. You didn't know when they were going to feed you, if they were going to feed you, which barrack was supposed to go, because they had certain orders that you went to the food lines by barrack, by wherever you were sleeping. But people were just walking aimlessly. They didn't know. And there were many Serbian prisoners that were captured, partisans, Serbians who were fighting against the Germans. In this camp, there were many of those. And nobody went to work. And then something happened. They asked for night shift workers. And somebody that I knew who lived near Rachov, who came, he says to me, Dutzi, he says, volunteer. It's good, he says, go. And I went there and I was accepted. And this is basically what I think saved my life. this particular incident, because what they did is they loaded us on trucks and they took us into a city nearby, and it was the main railroad cross yard for that particular region. All the trains had to go through this railroad yard, and they bombed that railroad yard every day. Those Russian planes would bomb them. They would take us, all the people that could work, take us into this railroad yard at night, light up the area, and make us fix the holes, fix the tracks. But here is the miracle. When they bombed these trains, which were stuck, these trains had flour, they had sugar, they had oil, they had corn, and we would eat. I gained about, I would say, I must have gained 10 pounds. I began to get stronger from all of the food. And then we began to put them inside our jackets and bring it back, and the prisoners who were not qualified would wait for us. They knew that we were bringing food to them.
There were no guards or anybody watching?
There were guards, but these were the home guards. They never entered the camp. They were on the periphery, and they didn't search us any longer. And the fact that I was able to go to the railroad yards at night and work there and have access to that food, I said, that's what saved my life. Because the death toll inside the camps was so horrendous. It was, I hadn't seen it in Melk ever. The conditions that I saw there was totally out of control. There was no cohesion. Everybody was on their own. The people died in the beds. They stayed there. They didn't even take them out. You had to go look for somebody to take them out. And then as spring approached, they stopped taking us altogether, and it was a devastation because I didn't have access to the food. And then one morning we got up, and there was big excitement, especially amongst the serfs, and they kept pointing and say, look, there are no guards. There are no guards. The guards are gone. The Russians must be here. That afternoon, the American Army arrived, the 2nd American Armored Division, who liberated this particular camp. And there wasn't great joy. There was a lot of sickness. And they brought in food. It was a mistake. People began to eat, and they couldn't hold the food, and they got diarrhea, and they got all kinds of things. But then they sort of eased off, and they opened up the camps, and the Serbians especially went into town. First they went through the barracks, and I went along with them.
How many people were still alive and left?
Maybe 800-900. You know, there was from Melk, and then the population of Abendsee. So we went in the army barracks that were adjacent, and we were looking for Germans. We couldn't find any Germans. We were looking for leftover food. They had cans that had Spam in it. There were leftover Spam, some jam, some oil, and we ate all we could, and we brought it back. And there was an incident where some prisoners went into town, and they discovered a warehouse that housed flour, sugar, oil. And in a rage, they took naphtha and poured it all over the food, so nobody could eat it, that the Germans wouldn't have the... Actually, these were Austrians, not Germans. The Austrians would not have access to that food. And the Americans then closed down the camp. We could no longer leave the camp. They kept us in the camp, but they put up showers, and they gave us cigarettes, and then the chaplains came, and it's like seeing the Messiah. You know, they were kind, they were human beings. And then we stayed there for about 3-4 weeks.
Did you get to know any of the Americans?
No, later on I served as the 1st American Armored Division, and the sergeant there said he was with the 2nd Armored Division during World War II, and he liberated that camp. Whether he was there or he wasn't there, I don't know, but he knew of the camp.
Were any of the officers Jewish?
We didn't have such contact. We didn't. You know, it was all like trying to save, you know. So
And this was in what month?
this was in April of 1945.
And you were how old?
I was then approaching 14. Yeah, I was 14, but I was 13 in December, so 14 and a half. Actually 14 and a half, a little bit, maybe a month younger than 14 and a half. And then they said that they are setting up a displaced persons camp, and all those that want to go should go. And they kept saying, don't go to a camp, don't trust. There's no reason to put us in a camp. And everybody, some people went, of course. I know I didn't go. And there were some people said that they're going back to Czechoslovakia. So we got on a train that took us to a town called Pilsner, very famous for beer, which was on the border with Czechoslovakia. On the other side, it's called Pilsen. We disembarked. We crossed over into Czechoslovakia, Pilsen, and it was like walking into heaven. They had a huge Red Cross tent, and the only thing they asked of you, oh, by the way, we did get civilian clothes from the American forces, we did.
Did they give you money also for
They
this
gave us
transport?
cigarettes, but no money.
How did you get on these transports?
Well, nobody paid. It was chaos, you know. It was just, the war had just ended. So we got into town. There was this huge American a Red Cross tent. And they said that in order to get food and a checkup, you had to take a shower. And I remember that incident very well because these showers were army-type showers. It was a pipe, and a machine was warming the water. It didn't warm it that well. So I was very eager to get to the food. I walked under the shower, and I put my clothes back on, and as I'm approaching the tent where the food was, there was a nurse. And she had cotton swab that she dipped in alcohol, and she rubbed it across my skin. And she said, well, she says, I really shouldn't give you any food because you didn't take a shower properly, but you promised me you'll come back tomorrow and you'll take a proper shower. And so she let me through. And it was very kind because I remembered, you know, to deny food to a prisoner is not that simple. In any case, we stayed there for a few days, and people said that they heard that survivors were heading back to their hometowns, and many Jews were going to Budapest. So somebody advised me I should go to Budapest. So I boarded a train. You know, you had to wait days sometimes, you know. As it happens, I was on the roof of the train. That was the only space. And instead of Budapest, that train went to Bucharest, the capital of Romania. And so I got off at Bucharest, and there was a soup kitchens that were ran by Jewish organizations. And I made my way to the soup kitchen.
Which Jewish organizations?
Hmm?
Which Jewish organizations?
They were
running?
just Jewish organizations. They were run by Jews, and only the Jewish prisoners went there. They didn't tell anybody not to come, but that's who went. And they had a big blackboard, and I see everybody's putting down their name, and they say, I am here. So I put down, Dutsi Stein is here. And remember I told you that I had an uncle who was captured by the Serbians, and he fought with them. He came there, and he saw my name.
What was your uncle's name?
Benjamin Belo. Bela Senderovich. And he came next day, and he knew I would be there during lunch hour when they served the soup. And I was my first contact with family. And he said to me that he heard that my mother had left Budapest and she headed back to Rachov. And he says that, so I stayed with him for 3 days, and he found a train when I was leaving for Rachov. And it went to, I boarded a train, and it went to the end of Romania, which was adjacent to the Carpathian region, and we had to disembark. The name of the town was Slatvana, a Romanian name, and we were stuck there. It was a long way from Rachov, maybe 40 miles away. So we hung around there and hung around. In Bucharest, I got money. Besides the soup, they gave me money. And also my uncle gave me money.
How much did they give you?
I don't remember.
Just enough.
But it was money. You know, it was something. So we were stuck in Slatvana, and there was no way to get to Rachov. So a native, a Hutzul, there's mountain people, came along with a wagon and horses, and he was willing to take people all the way to Yasin, which was the town after Rachov, and if you had money, he would take you. So I was very eager to get to Rachov. I take out my money, and I count out the money that I had to give this man. And there were 3 of us on the wagon. And on the way, the man that owned the horse and wagon got off the horse and wagon, and he fell back, and the horses kept going, and somebody else met them. And the 2 men with me, they were from Yasin, said that I made a mistake. He said, when you took out that money, they saw that you have money, they're going to kill us to get the money. And I really got scared, because I see those 2 guys are walking maybe 25 yards in back of the wagon, and they're talking very seriously. Horses are going on, and here these guys said, we're going to get killed for the money. So I said, what if we offer him the money? You know? So they said, yes, we can offer the money, but can you trust him? We didn't know what to do. And there's another miracle happened here. A Russian truck passed the wagon and came to a screeching halt. And the people that were left in Slatvana who did not go on the wagon began to shout, get in, get in, get in. So we jumped off the wagon, we jumped in the back of this Russian truck. And he very quickly he made it to Rachov, you know. And he stopped in the main square in the plaza where they had where they sold food and different things. And all of a sudden, I jumped off, and people were yelling, screaming, Dutsi is here, Dutsi is here. And we lived maybe 250 yards from the square, and I looked up and I saw my mother was running. And that's how we reconnected. And she told me that she left my 2 sisters in Budapest in this hostel where they are getting good food and good care, and that we were going to have to hurry to get back there.
Did you tell her about your father?
She asked me, and I told them that I didn't know. He never showed up. So before we were taken away, my father had asked me we had some gold artifacts. He said, we have to bury it